My first job was as a production assistant on the revival of American Gladiators in 2007.
Okay, this is why this is exciting to unpack.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. But we can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hello. I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre. And in each episode, I ask a cool person about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts they pursued, and how they feel about those pursuits now. Journalist and impact producer Madeline Moitozo joins me this episode. And we first crossed paths when I was working as a humble podcast producer at Vice Media in the heart of Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And that wasn't the first time in my life that being a comedian / producer on more of the entertainment spectrum brought me into the same space of a swirl of journalists doing actual important work. Which brings me to something very near and dear to my heart, the fact that the Vocalo public radio station in Chicago is essentially no more. Same goes for the podcast arm of WBEZ Chicago. What does any of that have to do with this episode or me in general? Well, I got my first foot into the world of media at Vocalo, which is a sister station to WBEZ, which is probably most famous for being the thing that Ira Glass says in episodes of This American Life. I moved to Chicago wanting to be a comedian and also wanting to secretly be a producer on specifically This American Life. And somehow the mix of both of those things got me into this space. Brian Babylon, a great comedian and frequent guest on Wait, Don't Tell Me, saw me at various events, both comedy and NPR affiliated, because I was doing free volunteer work just to be around the world of radio, but also because when you're a volunteer at events, there's sometimes free food. And hey, I was a struggling artist. Anyway, Brian Babylon taking a leap of faith on me and making me an intern on the Morning Amp radio show that he co-hosted with Molly Adams at Vocalo, I consider to be my first official step into the true world of media that I always wanted to be a part of. And that is just because Vocalo was a public radio station primarily managed by and dedicated to people of color in Chicago. And because of that, I got to leapfrog into being a podcast intern at WBEZ, learning how to edit and produce under the tutelage of one of the great podcast producers, Joe Dassault. So to know that these two institutions are essentially no more makes me really sad for what is happening in the state of media right now, and excited to talk to Madeline Moitozo about how she's navigated such media turbulence throughout her career and going forward. She has produced news segments for MSNBC during her time with Melissa Harris Perry and NBC's Early Today, as well as short documentary episodes for Vice Media's first daily digital show, Daily Vice. Her editorial writing has been featured in Al Jazeera, France 24, MSNBC, Vice, Teen Vogue, and other major outlets. And in 2020, she founded Juniper Media, harnessing the power of journalistic storytelling to create media for social impact. Now, what the hell does any of that mean? That was my goal in talking to Madeline in this episode. Please enjoy. We spoke just about a day or two before the 2024 Super Bowl. Excited to talk to you, Madeline, because we met, I feel like, at a career intersection of both of our lives at a place called Vice in the heart of Williamsburg, where what was made to seem like the cutting edge of everything was being produced.
Yeah, it was a magical time. It was a magical time.
And I know that you've had quite the journey throughout the spectrum of media, but it feels like now you have reached an exciting plateau that you feel in tune with. So that's great.
Yeah. I left Vice right before their first big round of layoffs. They laid off 200 people in 2017, and I left 2 months before that. And I initially left because I got, two things. A, I got an opportunity, and I laugh because it's so funny, to be a producer on the Caribbean version of America's Next Top Model.
Wait, to be on it?
No, to be a producer on it.
Okay.
Oh, I love that that was on the table. I'm not Caribbean, nor do I feel like I qualify as a model, but I will take any of that could have been true. No, a producer on it, and then I don't know if I don't know what happened if they didn't produce it or they went for a production company. But I banked. I learned, and I've learned this lesson before, but it was a good lesson to learn. Is don't ever tell anyone you're doing anything unless you physically sign the contract.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh no, I'm doing it, it's happening. They're buying my tickets, and then I left, and they were like, yeah, no. But at the same time, though, I also did get, and I did sign a contract for this. I got a literary agent, and sadly, he just passed away. He was a wonderful man, but he was pretty famous. He was the literary agent for Marie Kondo's Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up book.
That's one of the biggest deals of all. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she got a Netflix TV show, So I was like, all right, I'm signing on with the right guy. And I was writing a book about the artist formerly known as Prince. And I had met his driver and his bouncer and the guy who picked up his dry cleaning. And I'd gotten to know these people. And it was going to be a co-authorship between me and this guy who was his driver about the impact that he had on the people who knew him most. And it felt like a win. So I was like, all right, I'm going to leave Vice for this. And it turned out that regardless of how amazing your literary agent, what is actually way more indicative of whether you're going to get a book deal is how many followers you have on Instagram.
Yes.
And that was
this
a hard
world that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was and we shopped around to all the greats, all the big publishers. And they said, basically everyone said the same thing, which is we love Prince. He's an icon. This is a great story. And historically, readership of books about Prince is not very high. So it's not about him. It's people are listening to his music. They're not sitting around intellectualizing his life. I didn't get to go to the Caribbean with the models. I didn't get a big book deal. And I'm sitting here as a freelance journalist. And ironically, part of the reason I left Vice was because I was making crappy money. And I was just they're not, and I'm not going to be making, I was I'm very big on pay transparency. I think it's so important. And I was sitting there making, I think I made $42,000 a year for my role on Daily Vice. And I had $70,000 of grad school debt. And I was, 32 or 33. And I was just this isn't sustainable for me. And I didn't see myself grow. I wasn't going to get promoted to senior producer. Or, I was that wasn't going to happen in any kind of short timeline. So, but then I found myself, making $23,000 a year as a freelancer, living on a farm in I literally went and farm sat for my friend in Costa Rica. And I was I need somewhere to live. So I went to a farm in Costa Rica and watched this guy's chickens. And the place was not great, but had Wi-Fi and hot water. So I went and freelanced from there. I'm just and I still freelanced for Vice for quite a while, doing editorial stuff.
Well, I want to talk about the Vice of it all for a bit, because you laid out a lot of things that I think about often, talking about how many likes are necessary to get anything done in any industry. It seems how many followers are necessary, talking about how fast the consciousness of people is moving, where you're saying that no one is that focused on wanting to read anything about Prince anymore. That's kind of shocking to hear. And then when we were both at Vice, I had this epiphany where I was I'm very severely underpaid. I'm producing 10 podcasts. I'm overworked. Yet I'm supposed to just be excited because this place I work in has a bar in it or something.
And it's so cool to work at. I mean, it's the coolest. Just telling, there's so much social capital in saying you worked for Vice at the time.
But then I realized, they don't care. They almost want you to get burnt out because the brand is permanent youth. They don't necessarily want you to age there. It seems, especially if they're.
That's funny.
So that was of course they're just going to keep lying to me until I eventually leave, because it doesn't ultimately matter. Having said my little rant, I guess, and gotten your nods of approval, I think we can kick into gear the main focus of the show, which is learning, first of all, what the first genre was that called to you when you were a kid.
So the first memory I have of ever being inspired about something professionally was watching a PSA by the Ad Council on TV when I must have been, 6 or 7. And It wasn't this ad, but it was in the realm of it. Do you remember the it's a woman like making breakfast in the kitchen and she cracks an egg in a pan and she's like, "This is your brain."
Yeah.
And then she like throws it against the wall. She's like, "That's your brain on drugs."
And you're saying that that's the first genre of thing that you liked. You realize that
was like the thing that I got, like, I remember, like, just as thinking about my like professional aspirations, I didn't know how I could ever be that, or not the egg or the pan, the commercial.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking that was just the coolest thing that like someone out there got to go make something that could impact people's behavior.
Yeah. Do you have a dog?
I do. Yeah. Sorry.
I just heard a squeaky toy.
Nigel likes to. He decides to say hi. This is Nigel.
Hello, Nigel. We just got a dog about a year and a half ago. His name's Spock.
Oh, that's cute. I've never met a dog named Spock before. I'm all for the creative names.
And he sits when you do the Vulcan salute. But this is what you're saying right now is very fascinating to me because it's almost like you're saying that you were drawn to not just commercials, but commercials with a message that one could arguably say is on that cusp of propaganda almost. It's like it's a positive message, but
yeah, I never thought about the propaganda element. You're right, but because it isn't all commercials propaganda or something. But yeah, that there wasn't like ability to impact behavior change. I thought that was so fascinating, and like I arguably from my perspective at the time for good, And I was always though like I was not a child who like played sports. I'm fairly tall for a woman now. I'm like 5'6.5", but growing up, I was very small, like super, super tiny compared to all the kids in my class. So I never wanted to like be on the soccer team or like play softball. I never won trophies for anything except in 6th grade or 7th grade. Everyone had to do a speech in the 7th grade. And then you automatically got entered into a contest if you were the best in your classroom. And so I did a speech, and you could do it on either like how you'd want to change the world or homelessness or something else, or changing places with something like a carton of milk or whatever. And so I chose to change places with a homeless person and like do a speech through like what it's like to be homeless. This is like 1997. And so I won the classroom, and I got to compete and I never wasn't on the speech and debate. I didn't like know any, and I competed with like 5 other kids. And my mom loves telling the story that like on the stage was like all these cute girls, they were all women that got to make the final cut. All these girls in their like cute little like patent leather shoes and their like Sunday dresses. And there's like me dressed like a homeless person. I started the speech from this perspective of like, what I imagined it's like to be a homeless person. Then I went to stats and in my county and like, the issues that were the day. And I must have been 12.
12. This is like act 1 of the TV show of your life. This is like, tell me, what were your parents like? Like, what was going on? Were you listening to like Noam Chomsky as a child?
No, I did not. So I had a like pretty, I like was not, I was not an A student. I was an average student. I had like a reading disability. Like I didn't read at all, actually. I hated reading. I was like doing those Sylvan Learning Centers tutoring after school. But I was very passionate about like change. And my parents, I grew up in Northern California. So my parents were like conventional hippies. I grew up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it was the 90s and like this time of like, our mother's generations were the ones who were like breaking the glass ceiling. So my mom was like corporate America, Silicon Valley woman. My dad was a stay-at-home dad who like took me to tap dancing and like made my lunches. So yeah, very like feminist household. But yeah, I was an empathetic kid. I was sensitive too. I was such a sensitive kid. And yeah, I didn't want to, but I was an only child. I spent like a lot of time in my room. I had half siblings that were like 20 years my senior. So like I was the only child in my house. Like I did a lot of art.
And you were okay with that. Like, and I have a bit of this as well, where like I'm totally fine with a solitary life. Do you feel like you had that as a child? Were you clamoring to go to the neighbor's house, or
I wasn't clamoring. I definitely had like lots of play dates, and I think I was like well liked by kids at school. Like I had lots of like social, and I was on the Girl Scout club, or whatever. I was a brownie. And I sold Girl Scout cookies. I also, on that note, I lived in this like little mountain community where there was like a tiny post office and like a little general store and a little community pool. And then you would drive, 20 minutes down to Los Gatos, California, which is actually where Netflix and Apple are from. But the Silicon Valley also wasn't that cool when I was a kid. Like Silicon Valley is the TV show about it now. It was not hip when I was growing up. It was like nerdy engineers.
I just want to talk a bit more about your experience as a 12-year-old child on stage as the only young woman dressed as a homeless person to give this message. And you won, right? You won.
I won.
You won. What were you getting out of that? Did you feel like a rebellious edge in the act of doing that?
I will say, like, my entire life is like very parallel to Forrest Gump. Like, I feel like I have just like stumbled through things, and I'm like,
that's how I describe my life as well. Like,
yeah. Like, oh, look what I just did. That's wild, My favorite part of that whole story is that they had these trophies. There was like 4 little ones for the runners up, and there was this big one. And I was like, that thing is so beautiful. And it's like marble and gold. And then they handed it to me, and it was made out of plastic. And I, as a 7th grader, was like, I think I was expecting it to be actually made of marble and gold. It was and I remember turning it over on the bottom, and it said like Frank's Trophies engraved. And my mom's like comes out to me, and she's so excited, like, oh my God, you won. And I was like, Mom, this is just like made of like piece of crap plastic. This is even like a nice trophy. Like,
I was so seeing through the veil. This is the beginning of your journalistic interest, it feels like.
100%.
Not being excited about the fact that you won this thing, but because it's plastic and you can see that it was bought in a store and wasn't picked up from Mount Olympus, you're like, this is not actually worth anything.
Yeah, that is very true. It has always been about not wanting to be like seeing through the BS. What's the truth of the matter? Are things done? Am I being duped? Well,
this is interesting because I have so many of these same things, but I filter that in the direction of comedy and entertainment, and then you filtered it into the path. Like you discovered, I want to figure out this Forrest Gump journey, but into the path of journalism and media with a message. From that initial interest in the egg commercial and just media that is affecting people for the greater good, what was the first craft that you could say that you pursued? And is there any connective tissue between those two?
I mean, I would say writing, probably. I mean, like, if you want to say like really first, like, are you saying professionally or just as like a human being in the world?
Let's hear both.
I guess a human being in the world, definitely writing. In kindergarten or first grade, I think it was, before we could we knew how to like actually write words with spelling and all those things. Our teachers let us tell stories that they would write out, and then we'd draw the pictures for them. And they called it the publishing center. They'd like bind the books with the
nice.
You know what I mean? One of those like clinching things. And we got to take the books home. And we'd have our books autographed by our families. Like sign the books. And I wrote.
Feel real to you? Did that feel real to you? Okay.
I felt famous. I wrote an alternate version of The Little Mermaid. I wrote a story. Don't even try to analyze this, but I wrote a story about a belly button that learned how to jump on its nose, and there's a whole world there.
No,
yeah.
Okay. I think we do need to unpack that a bit. A belly button that jumps. So this is an Audi, I'm assuming, because if it's an innie, I have this is entering the realm of metaphysics.
From a 5-year-old. Yes. So I got really into that. I loved it. I loved doing that kind of creativity stuff. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is when I was talking about growing up in the mountains, I was like an entrepreneur from the beginning because I had like a brownie tart stand. I made there was blackberries that grew up in the mountains, and I would pick the blackberries and make them into tarts and sell them in front of the store, and make money that way. So I was like a little salesperson from the start. Yeah, I would say writing and kind of entrepreneurial spirit were probably like from the very beginning. I was originally a creative writing major in college. I graduated as a legal studies major, so I switched, but that was like always like writing was always important to me.
Writing was the one path that you described, and the entrepreneurial spirit was the other.
Yes.
And this is still very, very much in your youth. Okay, so now as we get more into the career side of things, what was the first sort of like stamp of like, oh, this is a job that I'm doing?
My first job was as a production assistant on the revival of American Gladiators in 2007.
Okay, this is why this is exciting to unpack. As a child, you were torn apart by the fact that you got a trophy that wasn't real. Then your first job is as a production assistant for a show about sports that would you say this is real?
I mean, yeah, I think American Gladiators is more akin to like American Ninja Warrior than some of the other shows I did. I worked on other shows that were, were even less integrous, if you want to use that word. But the athletes are real. The big thing that was not real, that was the fake part, which was my job, is is that we had 2 weeks to film like a full season, and it was a massive stage. And so the job that I and 5 others had, through 2 of which are still good friends of mine to this day, and that was 2007, so it was a long time ago, but was to fill the audience. And that was really, really hard because we didn't have a budget to, cast out. We were pretty desperate. And, it's mostly about getting the shot. You have to have people. So we ended up filling the stands ourselves with the crew. At one point, I'm not joking. At one point, we rented a bus. We took it to Santa Monica and we just pulled strangers off the street and put them on the bus. And there was another time where we got a school to come, but like the school could only stay for certain hours and we had to film until like 10 o'clock at night. And it was a disaster. Yeah, it was really, really bad. So that was the crisis of 2 weeks of like, how do we like get this done and get the audience filmed? And like, I think we did end up paying actors to sit in the seats at one point, but it was a great show. And it's like, there's a difference, right? I mean, I think when you watch American Gladiators or any of those shows, you're like, this is entertainment. Like, I'm not like getting a value. There's like not a value buy in here. It's just like not a mission driven like experience. This is not news, So like you can have fun with that. But I was also like 22 and it was during the writer's strike. So I couldn't get there wasn't a lot of like meaningful content being produced. And it was a really great anxiety producing time of life.
How did you get this job? What were the steps that led you to this? You just knocked on American Gladiators' door?
Yes, just passed them on the street. So I was going to go to law school, and I took this like weekend course, this kind of soul searching transformational course. And one of the things that happened out of that course was I got that like me going to law school was like kind of a cop out, and that I wasn't like lit up about it, and that I should go do something I'm lit up about because I'm young and live once. And I got connected to that memory of being a kid who was inspired about change, and I wanted to do it through the media, and I was inspired by documentaries and the impact of those. And so I just started sharing with as many people as I could that I wanted to do that. And a friend of mine from kindergarten at the time was dating a celebrity's brother in LA. And she was like, oh, I can get you as a PA.
Try through context clues to figure out who you're talking about.
I can tell you, it was she was dating Will Smith's brother. And,
what?
Yeah. She actually, I want to say she
I was imagining.
Yeah. Were you like, what was it, like one of the Hanson brothers? And so she like, had these connections, and she and I worked on a show together. And then it was one of those things where like once you get on as a PA, people are jumping from show to show. Yeah. And so someone else was like, oh, I know someone who's doing this show. Do you want to do it? Actually, I want to say the guy who got me that job I met at like a Halloween party in LA. So it's very much like you're just out.
Yeah.
You're out and you meet people, and yeah, he was like really nice, and he knew like one of the producers and was like, yeah, they need a PA. And
that's a beautiful thing about how things work. And I feel like perhaps that was your entrance into the producer matrix. Like you
totally.
Just have all of these strange connections. Is there anything that you learned being a PA on American Gladiators that has kind of followed you through even as you start to focus on more serious things in your career? Like any major lessons or just like a mode of operation with working with people?
I think I learned like be flexible, like the less ego you have in a job, the more successful you'll be. Like no job too small. And I've learned that over and over again, right? Because I then went on I took a break from media. I went and worked in international development, went back to grad school when I was 28, and went back as an intern at MSNBC at 28. You have to like drop the idea that like I'm too old for that, I'm too big for that, I'm too good for that, I'm too whatever. Like I think on that show, like it was our role morphed a lot. My poor boss, like he was like sleeping under his desk, like he didn't go home. Whoa. Like it was just like it was like not a humane environment. It was just chaos. So yeah, I think just being flexible. I think at one point I had to like go buy outfits for the dancers or something. It was just, just like being willing to like say yes and like not be offended or like have a like I'm too good for this I think there's so much ego in any major city, like LA for sure, and DC as well. There's like a lot of ego that like isn't productive. So I think that was just helpful for me to learn.
How much of this churn of all the different types of work that you did or do, how much is that just the state of the industry? Like, this is essentially all gig work, or how much of it is that impulse of constantly trying to see through the veil and maybe getting disinterested at some point and then moving on to something else?
Part of it was the gig work. I think part of it was the time that I came into the working world. I graduated 2007, and then we got the writer's strike, and then we got into recession, right?
Yeah.
So like I moved to DC. I wanted to work for like Nat Geo or Discovery because those were like educational channels that were based in DC. And I ended up like waiting tables, making like $3.50 an hour in Northern Virginia. God, yeah. I mean, my early 20s were just stressful. Like I had no security.
I really appreciate you mentioning that, because lately I'm pretty fascinated by like the sort of amnesia or just the urge to not talk about how much things like that '08 recession truly affected us all. And then I think, once that eases out, there's like a cutoff where people don't talk about it, or they act as if the effect of it isn't connected to everything now.
It's all connected.
And I feel like quarantine and the first big part of the pandemic is like that too, where this weird cutoff starts to emerge where people don't connect the dots so much.
Well, yeah. And I love, because I spent like 23 to 26-ish in DC, and I love going back there because I truly learned how to be like gritty and resilient. I came to DC as like a pretty like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Northern California, like, I'm just here to save the world. And like, aren't you? Aren't we all friends? I was like Barney the purple dinosaur. I was just like, I love you. And people like weren't really like, they thought I was, just totally naive. And there was this like, I remember like I dated a guy when I first got there who wore a suit and tie to work and went to happy hours, which over text were acronymed as HH, right? And I like didn't know that, right? I was just like, oh, happy hours, okay. And I just remember being so impressed by like these guys and their ties with drinking beer, and it's like, wow, they're so professional. Like I'm so impressed. I was just like such a like hippie kid. But being in the recession, the gigs, and then also just like trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and like I do like one of the things my mother told me, which I really appreciate, was like, don't be afraid to like change your mind. Like you can try new things, But there was the thread of like, I worked waiting tables. My strategy to get a real job was just to eavesdrop on all the conversations and pretend that whatever that table was talking about was what I wanted to do for a living, because I didn't actually know.
Oh, my goodness. That's brilliant.
I would be like, someone would be talking about like public policy, and then I'd like kind of chat them up, like, yeah, I just moved here from California. I'm trying to get a job in policy, or like whatever. And so that actually did lead to my
coworkers caught onto your scam with
nobody. Everyone was too self-absorbed. They were all like, whatever, But I collected quite a few business. They'd like drop their business cards in the billfold.
And did like, something happen as a result of this?
Yeah, I got my first job part-time at a PR firm as a publicist, and learned. And actually the woman, it was called Turner Strategies. This woman, Suzanne Turner, was the boss there. And she is a mentor of mine to this day. And really like instilled belief in me that like, you're really good at this. You should be working in communications in some level. But even that was part-time. I also was like hosting bar trivia part-time. I worked at like the 2010 US Census, like canvassing, knocking door to door. I just had no like, what's the word?
Grind.
Like,
yeah.
I was going to say I had no dignity. I just like had no like, I'm just like, whatever is going to not have me be homeless, I'm doing it.
Was that really the guiding force? Because when I think about my 20s, the guiding force was this like vague goal that was comedy oriented. Did you have a vague goal, or was it just
no, it was purpose driven, like okay. How can I do something meaningful that matters? Is it in PR? Is it working? I ended up working for the World Bank for a little bit, And
so in all these jobs, you were trying to find how can I do something meaningful, even if was there jobs that, did the World Bank, was that like opposing your personal values and you were still trying to?
I think I was, hopeful. I mean, I obviously knew that the World Bank was pretty controversial depending on like your views of international development. I think it felt good. Honestly, it felt like a little bit of like that was my first actual like salary job, or I was a contractor for 6 months, but like $40,000 at that point. I was like, oh my God, I'm making $40,000, I was like rich. And they had a fantastic cafeteria because it was like such an international place. So I got that benefit. But yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like I was doing anything necessarily like world changing at the bank. I was an assistant. But also just sometimes like this is the same reason why like, I would totally go on like as a comm strategist, I would totally be a guest speaker on like Fox News and like be a Democratic strategist or like, you know, I think it's like important to like not like everything is valuable if you're like going in it from an educational perspective. You know what I mean? Like I learned a lot about like how things work at the World Bank. And then I went from the World Bank to West Africa and worked for like a tiny, tiny nonprofit that was like doing microfinance loans. And then I worked for USAID.
I feel like you're the perfect spy. I was almost going to ask, are you a spy? But
I wouldn't tell you if I was, so. But I'm very unassuming because I don't like have spy vibes.
But you're kind of making me like, even though you are only a waiter or server is the proper term, right? Server briefly. You're making me realize how similar like the perfect person for that type of position is also the perfect person to be either a spy or a journalist because of the things that you glean from overhearing conversations, watching body language, knowing like you probably see, you know, couples knowing that they're going to break up before they sit down or whatever, having your eye open to all of these different things.
And and I think being curious, like that's like being curious about like how does the World Bank work? What are the dynamics of these teams? Like where's the bureaucracy? Like what's the challenging? Like I don't think that World Bank is like an evil institution. I think it's flawed deeply. And like I also saw like good things happen. But then it did enable me, like it's all stepping stones. Having it on your resume like didn't hurt me and helped me when I literally moved to West Africa for this job at like a small nonprofit. I worked there 5 months, couldn't stand it. Took a bus to Benin. So I was in Ghana. I took a bus to Benin, which is 2 countries to the right, if you're looking at the earth in the traditional sense. I guess it's east. 2 countries to the east, next to Nigeria. Knew one person there, didn't speak the language, and just like printed off copies of my resume and like got on a motorcycle taxi up and down the street and just passed them off to different like nonprofits and embassies and missions. And so I think like that being a risk taker to like, you know, figure out your next step and be a bit bold, which it was pretty bold. But again, it was like all in the realm of like, how do I feel like I'm a part of meaningful change and learning along the way, like, what does that look like? What does that need to look like for me to feel good about it?
You said that the first personal craft that you pursued was writing. Through all these different jobs, was there a consistent nature in which you were writing for yourself, or were there outward goals connected to writing?
No, it's like always the biggest struggle for me. I have a Word doc on my computer that says 24 minutes a day. Like I'm supposed to write for 24 minutes a day. It was originally 30 and then I timed it the first time. I could only get to 24 minutes. So I was like, I'm going to just decrease it to where I got to the first time. I mean, I had a blog when I lived in Africa, which like kept people in touch with what I was doing, which was great. I have countless like handwritten journals like throughout my life, like stacks and stacks of journals. I do have the stock. I don't write it every day. But I will say, like, depending on like how at home I was with myself or like mentally well adjusted I would write more. And then I'm like more disconnected or in stress or like survival, I don't write because it feels like a luxury to digest. But then that was so cool that I actually at Vice, I didn't get hired to write. I got hired to produce. And then I just happened to be on the same floor as the writers. And so I like went and made friends with them. I was like, can I write for you? And they were like, sure. And so.
But throughout, it seems like you're saying that it's usually like personal writing that is the thing that you're like, oh, I didn't get to do that. But that's always something that you do consistently or want to do consistently is like process your thoughts through written words.
For sure. Yeah. And there's other things I would like love to write. I mean, when I started writing for Vice, actually the first or second piece I ever wrote for Vice was actually about being a production assistant on American Gladiators.
I mean, my memory of Vice, we were just talking before recording about how that building doesn't exist anymore, but it does feel like a fever dream or something when I think about this basement filled with editors. And I would always go down there. I mean, every cubic inch was filled with someone on a computer, either editing or writing something. And I would always think about the hundreds of GoFundMes for all of these people's personal projects that they can't do because they're editing a a web documentary about a dominatrix who dresses as Hillary Clinton or something.
I watched that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre. We'll be right back after the break. Here we are in the middle of the episode. You Are the Genre is an independently produced podcast, so I appreciate anybody who has pressed the like button, the subscribe button, or written a nice comment on any of the websites that you can find the show on. If you like the podcast so much that you're interested in giving it some financial support, there is a newsletter component to the show that you can find in the show notes of this episode or by visiting youarethegenre.com. And if you sign up for the newsletter, there is an option for a paid subscription. One of the many perks of a paid subscription is that you get early access to future episodes. And speaking of future episodes, next week I'll be talking to my good friend Ian Abramson. We went to high school together. We moved to Chicago together to pursue comedy. And now Ian has an awesome debut stand-up special called The Heist, which you can purchase on Apple TV and watch right now. It's a great special. I was in the audience at the taping in Manhattan, and I'm so excited for the world to get to know about Ian through that special and his upcoming episode. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that this little section in the middle of the show is also dedicated to me highlighting some things that I've been enjoying. One thing that I really enjoyed was being a guest on the ghost-focused podcast Spooked over at the Sonar Network. It was really fun talking to the hosts about things that I believe about the spiritual world, why there are so few ghosts that haunt apartments, and honestly, I probably rambled way too much about, comedy and how I got into the business and all that jazz. Hopefully they cut some of it out. You also get to hear some of my really god-awful improvisation in that episode, but I think we made it funny in the end. So if you love ghosts, listen to that podcast, Spooked, over at the Sonar Network. And even though I already mentioned it, don't forget, there's a newsletter. Sign up for it if you like the show. Get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? You got to Vice, and this is where both of our paths intersected. How was that for you? Were you excited? Was that a nice plateau?
Oh, I straight up cried when I got the email that I got hired. Like tears rolling down my face. I was so excited because I knew the HBO show, and I in grad school did my master's thesis was inspired by one of the Vice episodes. It was hosted by, was it Thomas Norton? Is that his name? Do you remember? There's like Thomas. I remember Thomas. I think his last name was Morton or Norton. Sorry, I hope the Thomas, you're not listening to this. I apologize. He was kind of like a nerdy looking guy with glasses. He would always I remember him holding carrying around a teapot around the office for no reason. He was just a quirky dude. Yeah. Anyway, he had hosted and I think produced this episode about children smoking in Indonesia and how it was a trending and basically part of it was how as restrictions for tobacco increased in the US, the tobacco lobby is where can we export this so that we're still making money? And so they just exported to countries that didn't have laws against it, right? And at the time, Sampurna, which is the largest tobacco company in Indonesia, they would sponsor concerts and street cleanup. They were just ubiquitous everywhere. And then there was this massive crisis with children smoking cigarettes. So my thesis was inspired by that show. And so when I got the job, I was just oh my God, overwhelmed with joy, so thrilled. And also what was really cool is I was starting on a team that was brand new. So because the Daily Vice was the show I worked on, was new at the time. We were all new. Yeah. We had a lot of freedom. We were sponsored by Verizon. We got to pitch whatever we wanted. I remember one of my first jobs was to interview the guy who was the founder of Hookers for Hillary, actually, Dennis Hoff, who died, I think, last year. And it just was a wild, amazing, I could do anything. I also had a fair amount of anxiety because it was and I don't know if you felt this way, but it kind of brought up every insecurity of mine from middle school and high school about am I cool enough? Am I wearing the right clothes? Do I know the right news? Yeah. I just felt so, just self-conscious in many ways when I got there.
I will say, I haven't thought about this in a while, but it did make me realize this emerging dividing line is, I guess also when I got there, that's the first time that I realized, we are not focused on the millennials anymore, really. We are truly focused on these Gen Z who was still in middle school then?
Yeah, and I was the oldest. Whatever. I was the oldest millennial too.
But I felt hurt by that, oddly. I felt I don't think other generations had this where you you are still young, but everyone's focused on the middle schoolers, right?
Totally.
Right.
People who are, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is what contributed to some of like the crazy, we just started towards the end of my time there. We were like, some of those stories we're pitching. I'm like, what are we doing? Because I did want to like focus on change. And we did do some super cool stuff. We did I got to interview like the first trans athlete for Team USA. We did some like other really cool creative stuff. But yeah, I mean, I was on a team with brilliant people, like just truly but it could be intimidating. I didn't feel a lot of, and maybe this was my fault for not creating it, but I didn't feel a ton of mentorship, or I didn't feel like people were invested in how long I stayed, but loved my ideas and loved I kind of felt like I was being squeezed for my, creativity and my, ideas and intellect, but not a lot of holistic care or holistic appreciation. They did have the, puppies on Fridays where they bring puppies in the office. I guess that's nice. I did like the puppy day, and there was another one. I don't know if you were there for when they had the hot dog eating contest on 4th of July. Which was a little gross, to be honest. So I think they tried to build community in some ways, but yeah, I think I just felt kind of on my own and fending for myself. But maybe also I can be responsible. Maybe I didn't know how to ask for the kind of help that I needed. But I'm just not sure that would have been available,
Yeah. It's weird because we were there doing such different things, and I just remember being highly stressed about the most absurd possible things.
Totally.
But there were pluses and minuses, but we've both escaped or departed, depending on which word you prefer. But
maybe both. I don't know.
Maybe both. Was there something about that experience that sort of crystallized things for you and gave you a laser focus? Because you're talking about so many different jobs and all of them with the guiding force of wanting to do something positive and good. When did you reach that point where now I kind of know what that thing is? I can put more words.
I think I gained an immense amount of confidence in my ability. I mean, I learned to be, yes, I was an AP for MSNBC as well, but it's when you're working at a massive cable network show, it's different. You're not creating, it's totally, you're a part of a massive machine that's kind of already spitting out the stuff. The amount of freedom and creativity we had at Vice gave me so much confidence. I have things that I have my byline on articles that I just did myself. I have things that I pitched that were my story that I made happen. And just whoa, I could do that. That was incredible. There were times that I feel my voice didn't matter where it should have. That was kind of disappointing. And I don't know. It was a strange gender dynamic because all the producers on my team were women, but our senior and executive producers were men. And normally that maybe wouldn't matter as much, but we were in such a boundary pushing space that we wanted to pitch more feminist things that sometimes were lost in translation to our male counterparts or our male superiors. But I do think it made it very clear to me that I wanted to be telling stories that impacted people.
I want to talk about Juniper Media, which seems like a really cool thing. I was looking at the website, and it seems like you have gotten to the point where you are making your own egg commercials.
Yes, we are making our own eggs. That's great.
I was just looking at one. Oh, this one about Bianca for Indeed.
Yeah.
I thought that was great because I can see exactly what you're doing. You're working with a big name, but you're using this opportunity to highlight someone, a real person. You can feel their authenticity, who's working for positive change in the world.
Yeah.
How did you get to this point? And how scary is it to start your own? The term is media company, right? This is where it gets into. I get lost in the cosmos of business lingo.
We've also been what are we? Yes, media company, storytelling agency, creative agency. Yeah, it's a lot less scary when it's done incrementally. I didn't wake up one day and was I know what I'm going to do. I didn't have money to start a company. That's I'm self-funded, but I didn't it's not I had a big sack of cash. So I was I'll throw it at this. Yeah, the company started kind of accidentally, which is, I think, I know a strange thing to say, but I was doing this freelance journalism, and a friend of mine who I've known for a bajillion years has a production company in San Francisco called Even Odd Films. They do incredible work. And he reached out and was I don't know if you're still at Vice, but we're looking for a story finder for this branded documentary for Google. That was kind of the beginning of me applying my journalistic skills to a brand, which at first felt
I want to talk about this. What is the
Yeah.
What is the percentage of, I mean, I don't want
Yeah.
to, I mean, this,
Ask away.
but yeah, what are the things? What are the
Yeah.
feelings? Or like when you're like, this is the, and it's one of those spaces where it feels like, well, somebody has to be in this space. Wouldn't you prefer it's me? I feel like that is.
That's a great way to say it. I think where I started to, well, one thing is like we actually are very selective with who we work with. And this is what we're working through, right? Is like you hear a lot about the words, ESG and impact and all of those things. And I think it's really about who we work with, to be honest. Like we actually have like an ethical checklist that we like put every potential client through of like, look, every big company is doing good, well, hopefully some good things and some things that are counterproductive. Do we feel like we can align with this company? And it may not be that like they're a perfect company or they have like, but maybe they've made a past mistake and they're coming to us saying like, hey, we haven't done this very well. Can you help us own our stuff and do it better? Which I think like I could throw so many stats out there about like, 9 out of 10 millennials believe that companies should be prioritizing social impact. I think like 86% of Americans would pay a little bit more for a company that they know they are doing things sustainably or ethically. So we're coming into an era where people care more than ever about the way that companies are run and doing business and impacting the world around them. And so, we do have a pretty strong moral compass of who we'll work with, but a lot of it's also like, where do you guys want to go from here? The brand that we've worked with the most is Indeed, the hiring platform, and they've been with us the entire time. And the CEO, Chris Hyams, his father was the director of Time Cop.
The movie Time Cop?
Yes, the movie Time Cop. Fun fact.
Okay. The way you were starting that, I was like, are you going to say Time Magazine? Or are you going to say, like, when you said Time Cop? And I was like, okay.
All to say, he prioritizes storytelling. And they've gone on, they have this program, Rising Voices. They've given $1 million to 10 BIPOC storyteller, directors, filmmakers every year to partner with Hillman Grad, which is Lena Waithe's production company, and really like nurture the craft. And then the folks that they choose get to premiere their films at Tribeca Film Festival every year. And they're on the 5th season of that. And so I was on the first immediate team that was developing that. But I was originally hired to start telling. The Bianca story was one of the very first things I did for them, was how do we find real stories of people who've found meaningful work through this platform? And now our role with them has evolved as they are investing more in their ESG and the social, especially the S of the ESG, is what I work with. They do all three. But they have a whole initiative on skills first hiring, which is basically 2 out of 3 Americans don't have a college degree. And how can Indeed be a part of change so that this gap between employer and job seeker is minimized so that people who have skills but maybe don't have a traditional degree are not kept out of jobs they can be doing. And so we've gone beyond we do still do the kind of casting and the how do we tell real stories, but also like how do we now help this company develop who they are in this space and how they could be creating meaningful change in this space beyond the commercial. But it's not a slow evolution because we've been doing great the whole time, but like as far as who we've been and how the feelings of being someone who runs a company is, when you're doing it, when you're building the plane as it flies and, maybe, and it's like a lot of, for me, it's like, okay, like maybe we should invest in social. Maybe I just hired like our first PR person, our first social media consultant. Maybe we should do that and see how that goes, being not super precious, like being, we safe, like the revenue that we have and like making sure we can, run. But like, do we want to try this? You want to try doing this and see if that.
Are there certain points where you identify with characters from Succession? When you have this urge to be positive, but you have started your own business, I feel like the 2 sides on your shoulder, you got Logan Roy on one side. And then
so I have so much to say about that. A, because this actually is my favorite TV show. B, I'm not joking. I almost came to this call wearing like our Juniper Media baseball cap. And I was just like, I'm going to be too Kendall. So I won't. Love that show so much. I empathize mostly with Kendall. Or maybe I don't empathize. I sympathize. My life is nothing like his, but I have so much. I also just like feel bad for I feel like I don't know, root for the underdog. Yeah, I don't. In some ways, because I believe so much in what we're doing, I'm not a very good CEO. I'm sure I could be doing more to like make more money. I would much rather slow grow and know that what we're doing, I can like really stand behind everything we do.
I'm sorry, but I can't help but visualize Kendall saying everything you're saying right now.
Stop it.
Slow grow.
Slow grow, bro.
Yeah.
It's dope. I'm gonna break out into a rap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really now I'm like very conscious of my words. I'm not, I feel like I'm like not a good business person in the sense that like I do genuinely at the end of the, and this is, look, I think this is across the board. Like we are coming out of a time where like companies, like shareholder profits can no longer be the most important thing for a company. It's just not sustainable. You know, businesses cannot thrive in societies that are failing. And so that's just the truth. And like whether you're gonna like get on the bandwagon or not, like that's what's happening. You know, so I'm a good example in the sense that like I'm sure there's ways we could be making more money. I'm sure we could be like growing like crazy, but we also like honestly like all of the companies we've worked with, I think, literally all of them have been word of mouth.
Oh,
so
wow,
people like just find out who we are and what we do. And you know, we did have some like really like we were on the Super Bowl for a commercial and stuff, but like, you know, like so people might know who we are, but like it's mostly people being like, and because what we do is like fairly specific, you know, but like as times are changing and like the public consumer is demanding more transparency, authenticity, trustworthiness, social impact in their brands, like that is what we do. And so I think that our value for that point is increasing over time.
I feel like one thing that I'm regretting that we probably don't have enough time to cover, but so much of being a good producer is having this innate ability to motivate people, to get people active. How did you reach that point? Just the way you talk, and I already know that you know how to mobilize people. But were you always comfortable with that? Was there a phase in which you had to like really cultivate that skill, or is that just something that you've just like you've always been able to do? And I guess it's a little part of it too is I always imagine people who grow up with mini siblings having that skill, but as an only child, like what?
I didn't have anyone to boss around as a kid, so just my pets. Yeah, that's a great question. I will say, I think that like moving to DC as a young person was a big turning point for me of just being like learning how to be scrappy. I think that might have like started to develop part of that like energizing. But I also just think like when I'm passionate about something, like that's contagious because like people get excited. I mean, I wish like I have team members who I wish were on this call too. My colleague Jess, she's like me on, I was going to say on acid, on steroids.
She's like me on acid, so you know she's.
I can't wait for her to listen to this podcast. She's not like me on acid. She's like me. She's like me magnetized is what I was trying to say, and that she is so inspiring and so enrolling. And she's an Emmy award winning producer, and she's so great with people and getting excited and falling in love with people. Like we both fall in love with people all the time in our stories, you know, and we are very well aware that like the most amazing story could be like your postal worker.
Yeah.
You know, and those people like don't often get like airtime. So, you know, that's the cool thing about what we do is like finding those like small bright spots or those like hidden gems and like get to share those with the world. And to your point that you said earlier about like how did you like transition to doing this kind of work? Like when I saw the commercial I was telling about earlier about this LGBTQ plus Nigerian refugee, I could have written that story for Vice about a guy who, you know, and actually I did. I wrote 2 stories about queer asylum seekers for Vice that were published and did really well. But I did that as a commercial that got like millions of views.
Yeah.
You know, and like, okay, sure, maybe it wasn't like an editorial article or like something on Vice, but like a story got seen by people who maybe like, I'd be preaching to the choir if I wrote that story for Vice. Everyone's already like on board with the like people of African descent and queer people and immigration. Like there are but like I got to do that on like national television to like a wide audience of people who may not have already like maybe not familiar with the demographic or like they haven't humanized that demographic before. So I don't know, and also journalism's so blurry now. So like I just think that sometimes it is about the story and like sure people maybe take it with a grain of salt because it's a commercial, but those are real people and we didn't tell them what to say and we didn't make it up, you know. And that's what we do. We do the real stuff and I think there's something important about that and we hope that we keep growing and keep attracting awesome brands. And we just had our first voting client. We're doing a campaign with a large voter organization that they're focused on increasing the Latino vote, the Latinx vote. And so we also do political stuff and want to keep leaning into political stuff, especially this year.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Yeah. Hypothetical. You don't have to answer if it's uncomfortable. If Bud Light knocks on your door and says, we want to work with you.
Oh, let me tell you about Bud Light. Let's talk about Bud Light. Because did you see they just hired Shane McGillis or whatever? Yeah. God, Lord. Yeah, it depends. Are they coming to me on their knees and saying, like, please help us, save us from ourselves? Because, yes, I would do that. What a terrible thing to do. It would depend on the context and depend on the relationship. But depending on how much like creative liberty, I kind of hope that yes, please come to us, Bud Light, because you're doing a terrible job. And I would like want to talk to them, but that's an example of like, that is a company that like only looked at like shareholder profits and fear of loss and like prioritize that above doing the right thing and being a part of the fabric of social change that is this country. Yeah. I mean, do you remember the initial ad they used to respond to like try to save themselves?
Oh no, I don't. No.
They did the Dylan Mulvaney thing, and then they did like honestly, like it could have been from 1995. It was like a waving hills of grains of wheat and the American flag and a horse. And I'm like, did you guys just like put some B-roll together and then put like that's like basically like the all American, you know? And I'm just like, whoa, y'all are really, you know. And I thought that couldn't get worse than that, but this is just so much worse. There are ways that you can apply to demographics and also inspire the best of that demographic without being regressive. There's a commercial that Gillette did during Me Too that was basically because the tagline for Gillette is the best a man can get. That's their tagline. And they did a commercial, it's like the best a man can be. And they like basically did like a series of like showing like stopping the guy from catcalling, interrupting boys fighting and like protecting the kid being bullied and like just showing like when men are at their best, who they can be. And they got some backlash for it. They didn't like lose, you know, their stock didn't go down. They didn't like lose, but they stood by it and said, no, like this is who we're going to be in the face of this. And that's what I want to see more of. And so, yeah, Bud, come talk to me, man. We need to have some conversations because you're not doing it well. It's just like so transparent. Like they just so obviously were like, oh no, how do we not lose money? Let's just throw this together. Let's just appeal. Like it just like, yeah, they don't, anytime you come from fear, you're going to end up like contracting in some way versus like take a stand. And it takes courage to say,
you know, divide you have Budweiser and you have Bud Light. Let Bud Light be the liberal arm and let Bud Heavy be the, right. You know, why?
Sure. Exactly. I even that's in the right direction. Yes. Yeah. So it is, I do have compassion that some brands want to do the right thing and be more social impact oriented and are afraid of potentially losing a consumer. I get it. And you don't have to go as far, you know, I guess I didn't think that they were going all that far with the Dylan Mulvaney thing, neither did they, obviously, or they wouldn't have done it. But like, there's ways you can start to take action that may not be extreme. You don't have to come out with a crazy campaign. You can start, you know, incrementally. But you can also just like stand and like, what are you willing to lose in order to gain being part of change? It may be short-term loss. Like what I think they should have done is just said like, all right, screw you guys when they lost the customers and like gained an entire new demographic. If they had just stuck with it.
Yeah,
I like lean in, man, like lean in and go with it. You guys are going to be so popular with a whole new demographic that you weren't even attracting before. But you got to be willing to ride the turbulence. And that's some companies are too afraid of the turbulence.
Yeah, that's like the banner issue of the moment right now is like every studio, every company, every corporation is like afraid of the turbulence and just like making the most insane decisions.
I'm super interested to see. Have you seen this whole thing? Because the Super Bowl is apparently going to gear a lot of their ads towards women this year. Have you heard about this?
Oh no, I haven't. No, yeah,
because Taylor Swift is impacting viewership quite a bit. And so I'm really curious. Like, what are they doing with that? Like, are they going to take that opportunity to like speak to issues that impact women, Or will it be, I know there'll be quite a few of like social media influencers, and like I've seen some previews for them. Like, you know, Elf, which is a makeup brand, they debuted their first makeup commercial in the Super Bowl last year, and their ROI was like amazing on it. So I don't know. I'm just like hoping and like that they're thoughtful about what they say about the women that they're catering to matters. Just like, you know, I will shamelessly plug my opinion on this. Like the men who complain about Taylor Bull being in the Super Bowl, like they're watching football with their daughters now and their, you know, wives, and like women are watching them like be super upset that Taylor Swift's getting 15 seconds of airtime, you know, which on some level is communicating to these women that like they have no place in this, or that like be small, don't take up space, which like what they're watching a woman support her partner on the field.
Yeah, which is something you should love, right? Like,
exactly. Like, can you can you, like, the game's 3 hours long, guys. You know, be a little flexible.
It is insane. Like USA Today has a whole column dedicated to Taylor Swift and her, like whether or not she can make it from Tokyo to Las Vegas, and how many. It's very insane.
Yeah, and you know the Niners have a female coach on their team.
Oh wow, yeah. See,
yeah, the first.
So this is I'm learning everything about the Super Bowl.
I don't know a ton either. I'm just knowing the politics of it. Like they have the first female assistant coach in the NFL is on the Niners.
Wow.
So you know, let's just look at. I totally respect that. Like this has been like a male safe zone for most American men. You know, like this is my man cave time. You know, or whatever. And this is how I connect with my bros or my friends. I get it. And I respect that it feels sacred to a lot of men. And so they don't like want the screen, but like just keeping in mind that they like have they are like leaders in a way of like being aware of how they feel about it is reflected in the space around them. And they have an opportunity to like be a part of. Everything is changing. That's like the summary. Everything is changing. You can get on board with the change or resist it. And, yeah. And like, how cool is it? I mean, I posted something on Facebook about the Taylor Swift thing. And I had a male friend comment saying, he's like, actually, like, I'm like bonding with my tween daughter for the first time over something I never could do before.
It's incredible.
You know, so there's like really cool things that are coming out of this.
Yeah. Oh, the last big question is, I think, something that we've already answered, which is what is your relationship with your first craft or your first pursuit? And your first pursuits were writing and an entrepreneurial spirit. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I already know the answer to this. Like, it's all good. It's all gravy.
It's all good. It's all good. And it all came full circle so strangely. Like, I don't think, you know what I mean? I wasn't planning on it, but I'm grateful for it. And I'm really grateful that we get to do the work that we do. And that I get to employ other journalists, honestly, is so awesome. And help them, you know, be able to do the stuff that they want to do when they can, and support this storytelling in the meantime. And so I'm doing it. And, you know, no more books about body parts bouncing on other parts of their body parts. No more belly button stories. Maybe I'll do a round 2.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. That ties perfectly into Vice as well. But this is amazing. Started from American Gladiator. Now you're here.
You know,
Thanks for doing the show.
For sure. Absolutely.
If you want more from Madeline Moitozo, visit madeline-moitozo.com or visit juniper-media.com. She really loves the dashes. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Comedian and dear friend Ian Abramson joins me next episode. But if you become a paid subscriber to the newsletter, you can listen to it a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. But we can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make